The AI is a sensitive spot for us.
A very interesting Civilization 7 developer panel just wrapped up, revealing some new civs like 3 Indias, as well as a handful of others. And honestly, the 1-hour presentation, putting some of the technical difficulties aside, was a wonderful look in to the design behind Civ 7 and a chance for all of these wonderful people to reveal some new things about the game. So let me break it down for you. If you didn't have time to watch it, you don't want to sit down for an hour, here's all of the good stuff, and we'll begin with the juiciest stuff of all, those announcements about the new civilizations. First up, as you can see, 2 leaders that we already knew were in the game, Napoleon and Augustus. The developers revealed a potential pathway, and we'll have more about the historical pathways in just a couple of minutes, for Rome, or from Rome. In the Antiquity Age, you play as Rome, beginning as either Napoleon or Augustus again. Moving through to the Exploration Age, you can play as one of the newly revealed civs, the Normans. And then finally into the Modern Age, this one will come as no surprise, but the French Empire is also in the game. Again, I'll talk a bit more about the nuance, some of the extra details in the later part of the video. Let's move through and take a look at the second new Civ announcement, and this one is a triple whammy. It also builds a little bit on, sorry to bombard you with Civ 7 news, there's just been a lot of it, yesterday's video where we looked at the Japanese ruler, Queen Himeko, and how there are, quite possibly, if not certainly, multiple versions of Japan. You can change from one Japan to another, an older version into the Meiji Empire, for example. Well, we received an even better, more concrete, and all 3 age-spanning example in today's presentation with Ashoka, the leader of India. A potential pathway will take you through 3 different versions of India. And this part I thought was particularly cool, actually, I'm not gonna lie. Firstly, the Maurya India, then leading through into Chola, and finally the Mughal Indians. And that rounds out a possible, potential pathway that you or I could play as a player, as Ashoka, but also let's not forget about the AI, which they also touched on quite a bit. Later in the video, I'll cover it off in a bit more detail, but crucially, the AI, as they revealed today, explicitly, maybe not for the first time, but really explicitly, the AI will almost always, it feels, choose the historical pathway. So let's listen to this part buried right at the end of the presentation about those pathways. Will they be historical? Will civs actually follow history? Let's find out.
This is from Civ player IS612. How deterministic are the Civ to Civ transitions when a new age starts? Can you plan around certain choices being available, or will it be too random?
Okay, and I think this is one I can answer pretty quickly. We showed those pathways and how you unlock things and talked about that earlier, so I won't go deeply into that, but people are all concerned like, I unlock something, what if I can't actually choose it because another player gets to it first? So in single player, you're in charge. You are the player. You get to make the first choice. So you look at all the things you've unlocked, you choose it, the AI is going to work around that. So yes, you've got the choice you want.
I will say, though, that another thing that I saw is we did realize that role-playing is important to everybody. So the AI generally, if the option's available, they will always play the historic route because we want that to be still the storytelling in your head we want to be strong.
So I think there are 2 key takeaways there. As the single player, we'll get the first choice. That's important and shouldn't be overlooked. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly leading into our next point, the AI will generally choose the historic route. They will prioritize that where possible. They talked a little bit about the different routes that are available. Obviously, this diagram won't be new to you, but it does demonstrate some of the different types, whether they be historical, geographical, or tied to gameplay decisions. Historical ties, geographical ties, maybe Egypt moves through to Songhai. Or maybe if you've played more of a horse-based cavalry gameplay, then actually Egypt may have taken more of a Mongolian approach and you'll go down that way. A combination of history, regional, and potentially gameplay ties. The other thing that they talked about, again, is that AI element. Not just the AI picking historical ties, but moreover, in fact, there was a whole user question, viewer question, I should say, dedicated to the AI. I think we should take a listen to that one, because in it, they outline a couple of very important points. The AI has less to manage, less busy work, fewer decisions, allowing it to make better ones. Collapsing units inside of a commander and marching them around the map, a great example of that. and in general, it seems like it could be in a fairly good place. Touch wood, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Take a listen.
The AI is a sensitive spot for us. We've done a tremendous amount of work, not only just on raw AI, we've doubled our team size there, but on the design side, we don't want to just be creating more busy work to increase complexity instead of focusing on depth. But the easiest example I can give you, for example, is commanders and armies. The ability for you to just take your carpet, consolidate it, and have it under a commander, move it across the map and deploy it. Things like that is an example of what the AI can now do really well. They don't have to manage 50 units trying to do an attack and a positioning game and the whole 9 yards. Making sure that we're only doing interesting decisions and important decisions as we get later in the game means that the AI has specific things they can focus on, not trying to manage all the noise that's going on in the background. So we've already gotten feedback from our press events that we've had, Gamescom, the whole 9 yards, that it's feeling really good and it's feeling particularly impressive in terms of being competitive.
So there you go. Not setting huge expectations, especially not at the start of that section, but kind of promising, in a way, that the AI will be a bit better this time around. At least that's apparently how it seems so far. Obviously, there's a big let's wait and see slapped across that one. Most of the presentation focused on history and layers, and that means talking about this kind of thing, the 3 ages and changing civilizations. And I'll share lots of little sort of rapid-fire insights at the end of this video, but now we need to delve into one big focus point. How do you make it actually feel like one empire? With the changing of civilizations, how can you actually pull that off? And here they focused a bit around the way it looks and plays. And this is really crucial because it blends the city districts and how you build a city, as well as how they might change over time based on the age and your civilization. They start with Rome. Augustus, I'm assuming, but who knows. Focus features here are the Colosseum, of course. Kind of got to build that if you're playing as Rome, but more importantly, the kind of interesting looking districts that aren't just housing. Those are specifically Roman districts, and they talk about an example where a Roman city may have a unique quarter where both unique buildings to Rome, are added to that district. Those buildings within that quarter will remain as you move through the ages. Perhaps you might add something to them later, maybe extra specialists, which were also a focus of the presentation. But, moreover, those unique ones will remain. However, other things will change or be added. Here you can see a Norman city that's built upon that change that we talked about earlier with the reveal of Normans as a civilization in Civ 7, how Rome becomes Norman. You can see the Norman buildings up in the top right. They look a little bit different to the orange tiled roofs of the Roman architecture from before. Some things remain, like the Wander and the unique districts, but also new things are popping up, like the Norman lighthouse. This transition was their key example for how the game will handle those potentially violent, maybe disruptive to the consistency, the narrative of a game, how it'll handle those changes. They also talked a bit about how some things will stay the same, like Roman traditions, through the policy tree, still available for you to use however you might like. But a lot of the perhaps generic buildings may leave you, or no longer provide as great of a benefit. Speaking of the art style, they talked a little bit more about the inspirations for how the game looks. Specifically here, they talked about wanting to go a little bit closer to the way Civ 5 looked, which personally, I don't know about you, but I love it. Specifically, they said they wanted to change the tone. They wanted to go back to Civ 5, using things like miniatures, dioramas, and these kinds of inspirations from museums and other key sort of cultural centers, I suppose, if you will. Bringing a little bit more realism to the game, making it look a little bit more authentic, while also still trying to keep a fairly vibrant style. And I think actually looking at these inspirations, having again, thanks to 2K and Firaxis, played Civilization 7 hands-on just a little bit, I think that they have kind of nailed this. Obviously the proof will be in the pudding. What kind of system do you need to play it? Blah, blah, blah. Lots of wait and sees. But personally, I'm a fan. I like this direction. And the direction for the rest of this video will be some rapid-fire points that I thought were very interesting. They touch on some of the things we've talked about already, as well as breaking some new ground. Firstly, they said that they need to restructure the game. That was part of the design behind Civilization 7, to provide, quote, more manageable chapters, end quote, with less of an explosion of things to manage. The way that they talked about this, something I've hinted at before because they shared almost the exact same kind of messaging during the presentation that I witnessed when I went to play Civ 7, and this was the story of Ludgate. The first part, Roman London, representing the Antiquity Age. Then the Norman, sort of going into medieval Renaissance period, that representing the Exploration Age. And finally, the Industrial Revolution, the Modern Age, and how that might actually look in terms of gameplay. Probably Roman, into Norman, into some kind of England or Britain in the final age. They haven't announced that last part yet though, of course. Speaking of ages, they said that the Antiquity Age was a maximum of 200 turns, and that every empire in every age should be thought about as being at the height of their power. This is their glory days. That's why, for example, maybe Norman might be in the Middle Age exploration, but they won't obviously introduce it in the First Age, Antiquity, because that doesn't make sense, nor does it make sense to have them in the Modern Age. In terms of the actual nuts and bolts, they drilled into kind of how Civ 7 gameplay will manage this. They said there's a screen with milestones and objectives to be reached, to open up options for changing your civilization. Again, sort of calling back to that horses thing if you're playing as Mongolia. So there will be a way that you can kind of craft this, figure out what's on offer and how you can get it. Obviously that makes sense. The UI will be really important there. Speaking of Civs reveals new options when they revealed Norman and France as two options, they also talked a little bit about how other options, whether introduced by Firaxis or introduced by the modding community, they said, could play a part here in the story of a French empire forming. It could be Gauls, it could be Frankish, or it could be the Holy Roman Empire. Wouldn't surprise me if we'd eventually, if not right from the start, see many of those feature, because I think they are great additions to the game. Later, toward the end of the presentation, during those community questions, somebody asked about the balance between tall and wide civs, something I was very interested in. I tend to be a tall player. Maybe that's one of the reasons why I like Civ 5 better than Civ 6, I don't know. They said, yeah, we've thought about this quite a bit. Two things specifically they mentioned. Number one, specialists are returning, like the ones in Civ 5, much more enhanced than the versions that we've seen previously in Civ, they claim. And secondly, the introduction of a hard settlement cap up the top left of the UI. This cap, by the way, can be increased through culture, the culture tree, very important here. Or, alternatively, maybe it'll change depending on the empire that you're playing. With certain empires, Rome was mentioned specifically having a greater city cap. Also in these questions, they talked about multiplayer. Ages, they claim, make for more manageable chunks of gameplay. You may choose to just play one. Maybe one weekend, the second age in weekend 2, the third age in weekend 3. A maybe cleaner way to divide a massive game of civilization, or perhaps you just play one. Cool mechanics, they claim, have been put in place so that setting up a late start, starting in age 2 or 3, feels better than before, and finally, the map expands as you go through into, say, the exploration age, and that's one of the reasons underpinning some of the, shall we say, less generous player caps for some consoles, in particular in multiplayer Civ 7. Finally, on gameplay, before talking about what's next, some juicy stuff there too, they just briefly talked about some combat changes, specifically fortification. That fortification mechanic that we have talked about before, where you fortify a unit and they kind of actually look like they're fortified on the map. There may even be a little fort built around them. Well, that mechanic can actually be used not just by the building and occupying troop, but by a new incoming troop. You can basically keep the fortification on the tile while removing an injured unit and walking a full health unit, let's say, into its place. The fortification doesn't go away, it's held to the tile. I thought it was a cool little tidbit. And finally, rounding it all out, they really talked about how launch is just the start of the journey. They'd like to lean into the community as well as, of course, enact their own DLC content, I'm sure. And I think we should expect that. Civ games tend to have a very long life cycle. They actually talked at one point about how Civ 3 still has about 4,000 active players on Steam. Very cool indeed. In terms of more practical next steps, well, September 12 is the day to watch in particular, for they are going to do a developer live stream, a gameplay live stream as well. So we should get a nice big chunk of Civilization 7 gameplay to jump into, and of course we'll be able to hear the developers' perspectives. I'll put a link down below if you'd like to have a listen to the full presentation that I talked about today, I'd highly encourage you if you've got the time. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm sure there'll be more breakdowns like this to come, so I will see you wonderful people next time.